we've had a kind of political, constitutional downpour as well, haven't we, in the last 24 hours? So we thought we'd just sort of stand back and try to take stock and ask what are the constitutional and political ramifications of that ruling in the High Court yesterday. A ruling which said the Prime Minister Boris Johnson acted unlawfully, that he shouldn't have shut down Parliament. And that's why MPs are heading back here today. Well, our reporter Graham Satchell has been taking a look at the history of all of this, of the significance of the judgment.
This is an extraordinary moment, a huge moment in British constitutional history. Historians in the future are going to look back and discuss this ad infinitum because it lays down very clearly that Parliament is sovereign. Because every time we have had a debate between who is sovereign, is it the monarch or the Prime Minister or is it Parliament, Parliament always wins.
Parliament is sovereign, suspending it was illegal, and Boris Johnson gave unlawful advice to the Queen. The verdict of the Supreme Court was clear and devastating. Some also believe it'll have a dramatic impact on the future relationship between Prime Minister and monarch.
Traditionally, the Queen relied on the Prime Minister's advice, and we now know for the future, for the Queen, for the monarchs that follow, that if it comes down to a choice between what Parliament wants and what the Prime Minister wants, it has to be Parliament, and therefore, at some stage, the Queen or any other monarch is now empowered to ignore the advice of the Prime Minister if he or she feels it is not commensurate with what Parliament wants.
Throughout history, suspending Parliament for long periods has never really worked.
We go right from the Magna Carta right up to what's seen as the most celebrated moment of prorogation, which is when Charles I prorogued Parliament because he didn't get what he wanted out of the MPs and wanted higher taxes, prorogued Parliament and caused such a great controversy that pitched Britain essentially into the Civil War.
And they chopped his head off.
Yes, and Charles I was of course executed finally for proroguing Parliament.
That, of course, won't happen to the current Prime Minister, but outside the Supreme Court, the anger on both sides is clear, and there are now those metaphorically calling for Mr Johnson's head.
If the Prime Minister had any principles or integrity, he would resign, but I don't expect that to happen, frankly.
The elephant in the room here is Brexit. Officially, the referendum was advisory, but the question for some is this. In practice, did Parliament give away its sovereignty to the people when it called the referendum?
The people spoke and they made their judgment, but we have a political class, we have a ruling class, which I include the judges here, that have decided they're going to thwart that result at every turn.
The issues at stake could not be more fundamental. The sovereignty of Parliament, the will of the people, the rule of law. Graham Satchell, BBC News, Westminster.